All right, so I really want to say thank you for you guys coming out and participating with us. Like I said, we're live streaming and I'm also recording this for our YouTube channel. The objective of recording this is to kind of record what we're talking about so I can share with other people. And I'm hoping to do this class other places within the San Felipe Baptist Association that we work with Punla. So this is kind of our trial run. So if I say something that sounds a little stupid, just interrupt me and let's talk about it right away. This is meant to be casual. This is meant to be a conversation, not just a lecture. So, and today's really just going to be an introduction, right? So, we want to start with a song, just because I think sometimes that puts you in the right attitude. If you know this song, you'll understand. This is Casting Crowns, Nobody. Kind of puts you in the right frame of mind. So, a few housekeeping issues. So if you need to get up and move around, get up and move around. Okay. The seats are probably hard. If you need a cushion for your seat, we have some cushions in the other room. One of the kids can go get it for you. If you want something to drink, help yourself. Okay. Again, one of the kids or Judy can guide you on that. Any questions before we get started as far as that goes? So I'm going to start with a bit of an apology, just so everybody knows I'm not a pastor, so I have no bedside manner at all. Okay, so I'm an engineer, and as an engineer, sometimes we are abrupt with our language, and I apologize for that. So if I say something that might offend you, I apologize already. Just tell me, and then we'll fix it, because, well, I'm an engineer. We don't deal with people, really. We deal with other things. So just keep that in mind, that I'm not intentionally saying something that would hurt your feelings. It just give me some grace and let me know, though, because I want to correct those things. If something we talk about today kind of hits you later, and you have some sort of question you'd like us to follow up with, send me an email, and then we can, or you can text one of us, and then next time when we come back, we can discuss whatever that is, because there's going to be a lot of things where, if it's the first time you've heard it, I know in our family we've been going through this for the last year while I went to school, and it's like so many aha moments when you hear these things that sometimes it takes a few days before it sinks in. Before I get started, the books are just a sampling of the books I had to read for seminary. And we'll talk about some of these books. And one of the things I want to do with the classes is kind of introduce you to some of the resources that I got introduced to that I just thought were amazing. So feel free to peruse some of, this is just a few of them. I read 36 books last year as part of my seminary in 5 months. And I'm also a scientist, which is the reason I put a few textbooks over here, so you know I actually do know the chemistry. So when we get to the science stuff, I'll get kind of excited, and you'll be able to tell, because that is what excites me. But another thing to remember as we go through, there's nothing that we're going to learn in here that will change the mind of somebody that is a staunch, committed atheist. Just, that's not how it works. We're trying to learn things so we can answer their questions, answer their doubts. But if they really don't want to find God, they're not going to find God. And I think Blaise Pascal said it best. I love this quote. And he says, "In faith there is enough light for those who want to believe, and enough shadows to blind those that don't." And I mean, that's tough for us to do, when to understand when our loved ones just don't get it. You know, some of the smartest people I've known in my life are not Christians, and it's like, wow, you're so smart. How can you look at this evidence and not believe? But that's just the facts of life, and we need to recognize that we're trying to gather information so we can give a thoughtful response to their questions. But it doesn't mean it's going to convince them. Okay, so there's no magic bullet. God's not going to override our free will. I mean, that's the thing about God. He loves us so much that he allows us to make a choice, even if that choice is not him. And I think C.S. Lewis put it really well. And he says, there are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those that God is going to say, thy will be done. And that all that are in hell, they actually choose it. And without that self-conscious choice, there would be no hell. So I like this, and no soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. And I think what C.S. Lewis was trying to tell us is we have to kind of be at peace with our loved ones' decisions. That doesn't mean we give up on them. We keep working on them. But God loves them so much. I mean, the Bible says nothing can separate us from the love of God. That includes hell, by the way. Everyone that's going to spend eternity separated from God in hell, God still loves them. He loves them enough that he allows them to make that choice. And there's only two choices in the end. There is God and whatever else it might be, right? So the objective, and the reason I appreciate you guys coming together, is we want to talk about there's a lot of really good evidence for what we believe. And sometimes we don't. We concentrate so much on what the Bible says, and we miss what everything else says about God. And that's kind of where we're going to focus on a lot. And I heard this analogy, I think it's Greg Kokel. We'll talk about him. He's one of the authors. He talks about putting a stone in someone's shoe. That when you have an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody, you give them a nugget that sticks in their shoe, and hopefully over time, it annoys them enough that they want to dig deeper. But I have to be honest, the things we're going to talk about today are probably more like this, okay? It's probably a very small stone. But if we can keep putting stones in somebody's shoe, eventually that shoe is going to get full. And hopefully I'll slow them down enough to actually pay attention that God's real. But obviously if they want to ignore God, then God's going to give them what they need to ignore the obvious. And it's pretty obvious that God is real. And so that's just kind of a start. You guys have any questions? So I wanted to start by, basically telling you a little more about me. I know everybody knows me, but you probably don't really know me. You know, I grew up in a really small place in Nebraska. I think I've told several of you this. I graduated with, I think, 16, maybe 17 people in high school. So it's a small place, okay? I always joke about the fact that the cows outnumber the people several thousand to one where I grew up. And that's an understatement. It might be 100,000 to one. I don't know. So it's a really small place. And I was an athlete in high school, and I went on to college, and I actually, believe it or not, despite the way I look, I was an athlete, and I'll give you just a quick glimpse. This is me at 19 years old when I was on the football team at Nebraska. I won't say I played at Nebraska because that would be overstating. I was on the team, got into one game, but that was about the extent of it. But I wanted to kind of use this as one of my examples today. This is Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, Nebraska on a football Saturday. 80, 90,000 people. I don't know what the stadium holds now, honestly. They had 92,000 at a volleyball game. That's true. That is true. So my athletic career was very short-lived. In fact, I wasn't on the team for very long, like a year and a half. But I graduated from Nebraska with my chemical engineering degree. And then I went on to Auburn University in Alabama to get my PhD in chemical engineering. And I did research for NASA and for several government agencies. So I actually am a real scientist. I did research before I ended up doing what I do now. But I taught at Auburn University for a couple of years. So I have been an instructor at a university before, and then I went on to what my career's been. Last 25 plus years I've been working as a consultant in the oil and gas industry, and I've traveled pretty much everywhere. I've been in, 50, 75 countries around the world, every continent except Antarctica. And so I've seen a lot of things, and God's blessed us with the ability to make money and lose money, and through all that process I think our family has surrendered our lives to God, which is the reason we're here having these conversations. Because what we want to do is at Punla Christian Ministries, one of the things we want to do is equip people to reach people. And we know we can't do it. We're only a couple people, and we're not people persons to start with. So what God seems to have guided us to do with most of our ministry is to try to share the information that we acquire as we acquire it. It's not ours. We acquired it from somebody else, but then share that in a way that other people might be able to use in whatever their interactions might be. And I don't know if any of you guys know that we have a media ministry. When I got out of the hospital after I had COVID, this is what God put on our hearts, and so we put out videos online, and this is actually going to be on the coffee table. And it's kind of a joke to me. I call it Punla coffee table. I don't drink coffee, but Joy and Judy obviously do, and it's nice and it's catchy. So that's kind of how we got to this. So, and you guys know that I went back to school in March. So I spent 5 months in seminary, 2 different seminaries actually, getting a master's and a PhD. Don't ask me how I did it in 5 months because I don't understand. Thank you, God. So I got 2 doctorate degrees, but please do not call me doctor because I cannot cure any kind of disease. I'm useless. Just skip, okay? So get that out of the way. It doesn't mean I know anything more than you guys do. It just means I spent time doing whatever it was I did. So, okay, enough of that. Does anybody know what this is? What? Oh, you work for NASA, so you're gonna cheat this part. So this is actually an Apollo spacecraft, and it's actually an artist depiction of Apollo 13. And if you guys know anything about Apollo 13, this was the crew: Jim Lovell, Tom Mattingly, and Fred Haas from left to right, and they were the Apollo 13 crew. A couple days before they were supposed to lift off, the medical staff thought Tom Mattingly was coming down. I think it was the measles or mumps. I can't remember exactly what it was. So they replaced him with Fred Swaggart and Tom Swaggart, sorry. And this is kind of what the spacecraft looks like. It had the lunar module hanging off, then the capsule, which is the command module, and then the service module. And that's what it looks like as they're flying off to the moon. And somewhere between Earth and the moon, well, they had a problem. To say they had a problem might be understating a little bit. Jim Lovell is very famously remembered for the words, "Houston, we have a problem." And in fact, those aren't accurate. That's the movie version. It was more like, "Houston, I think we've had a problem here," is actually the words from the street. And it was a problem. One of their oxygen tanks had exploded. And they're halfway between the moon and here. It's not much you can do. In fact, this is what their spacecraft looked like. This is the service module and the command module. You can see there's a lot of damage on the outside. It's a miracle that the spacecraft did not come apart, considering what happened. But they had a lot of other problems happen. If you don't know the story, they made a movie out of it called Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks. It's really good. It depicts the story pretty well. But it was a miracle, and they got back. And I've actually had the opportunity to meet, I think it was Fred Haas one time, because I worked for NASA at the Space Power Institute. But I like these words, Houston, we have a problem. And if you've heard it and you know it, then you understand where I'm kind of going. But I'd like to kind of use these words and rephrase them a little bit. I think church, we have a problem. I think for far too long, Christians, myself included, we have been just willing to let the culture fall apart around us. And, we need to wake up as Christians because Jesus gave us a commission. And our commission was to go and make disciples, not to let everything fall apart around us. And I think it's just sad in the Western church that we've seen this kind of steady devolve of not only the community that we live in, but the churches themselves, because we've kind of got away from, we think there's this separation of the church and the real world, and we have allowed all these things to kind of come and stand between us and what God is actually asking us to do. So wanted to just give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to go back to Memorial Stadium for a second. I would guess, and my mom and dad might correct me, but a vast majority of the people in this picture probably would profess to be Christian. I don't know. Nebraska is a very conservative state. Can you imagine if they actually acted like it out in their communities, though? I mean, 100,000 people in a community really doing what Jesus asked them to do, it would make a huge difference. We'd live in a different place. I'm not disparaging them in any way, but we have to get activated as a church. And part of it is kind of learning how to stand up to the things that are going to be tossed at us, because they do toss things at us out there. And if you put yourself in the opportunity to say that you're a Christian, you're probably going to get some pretty nasty things said to you now. So how do you respond to those things? And that's one of the things we want to talk about. So the series itself, I've titled it, How Do You Defend Your Faith? Apologetics, I hate the word. It's really a plan to how to do that. And our objective is to do the preparation part of this, is kind of share ideas and things that we can use when we're confronted with skeptics. Plus, this information is incredibly encouraging for you because it gives you so much confidence in what it is that God has told us. And I was a Boy Scout, actually an Eagle Scout, and we had a motto, and it's be prepared. And I think as Christians, we are called by God to get prepared. And I think that's what this is about, is sharing this information. We can be prepared for what's going to happen. It might happen at the store. It might happen, sometimes it even happens inside our churches where people have doubts. And we need to be able to cultivate those questions and doubts so they share them with us. And then we need to be able to give them a very logical, reasonable answer to those doubts. Now, maybe, I don't know, let me find out, because there's a lot of resources outside of us, but we know how to find the resources. I mean, so I think leading that conversation is the key, but you have to have a little knowledge base so you're not intimidated by what it is that people are going to be kind of throwing at you. So I think it's really about owning our faith. I think too often, I know I was too comfortable allowing people to tell me what I believe instead of actually understanding why I believe what I believe. And that's one thing that my education has helped me with, is understanding there's great proof, evidence for what we believe. We do not have blind faith. We have a faith that is based on tremendous amount of evidence. And the world out there will tell us we have no evidence. Well, what we're going to do in here is we're going to talk about the evidence, and there is lots of it. So, but I did want to start, and then I'll ask if you have any questions. One thing you got to remember, especially in today's world, there's a difference between church traditions and what actually is in the Bible. And the skeptics and the critics out there take advantage of this, because many of our traditions are not biblically laid out. And if you don't educate yourself, when someone says that to you, you can be really shocked. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples you probably already know. This is a picture from the Encyclopedia Britannica of St. Paul. And I don't know about you, but I always heard the story that Paul the oppressor was miraculously, Jesus changed his name to Paul from Saul on the road to Damascus, right? I heard that all, growing up, it was just not one of those normal things. And that was in Acts chapter 9, where Saul falls from his horse, he sees Jesus, he's made blind, and then Ananias comes to him, and that's the beginning of his conversion. But in Acts chapter 13, he's still Saul. So, and this is the excerpt, Acts chapter 13, verse 9. Then Saul, who is also called Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit, looked at him intently. And this is the one place in Acts where you see both names. And the story is Barnabas and Paul are on Cyprus, and they are confronted by a sorcerer. And if you know the story, Paul prays and makes him blind, and there's a really amazing story that goes on. But this is the point in the book of Acts where Paul becomes Paul. Actually, up until this point, he's referred to as Saul all the way along. So the story we've heard of the miraculous name change, well, it could be true. It's not recorded in the Bible that way. It's actually more likely that Paul is his Greek or Roman name, and Saul is his Hebrew name. And I'll give you an example. Walter, what's your Chinese name? So why do you use Walter? Make life easy for other people. Or for me, because I know his name and I can't pronounce it. I've tried. And I think it's more likely that's exactly the story with Saul and Paul. When he's in the Greek culture, he's probably Paul. He might have even been born Paul. But when he's around Hebrew people, he was Saul, because Saul is a Hebrew name. It's even possible that when he went to study under Gamaliel in Jerusalem, if he'd had a Greek name, they would have wanted him to have a Hebrew name. So we don't know. But it's one of those church traditions, and someone throws out, oh, that's not in the Bible. You go, yeah, it's not in the Bible. It could be true. And all of a sudden they're like, there's no fuel for their conversation. And I think knowing that it's a church tradition and not a biblical fact helps you, because it doesn't change our faith in any way. Another one, you guys are going to not like me for this one. This one, the Christmas Nativity. And I love the Christmas Nativity. Don't get me wrong. We had one that looked almost like this when I was a kid. But there's a lot wrong with this picture. Do you guys know how much is wrong with this picture? I mean, you start with the three kings, who probably came 2 years later. They're definitely not at the birth of Jesus. And then there's animals in the stable. Well, the shepherds are in the field by night with their flocks, which means it's spring or summer, which means the animals are outside. They're not in the barn. And then it's obviously not December because, again, the sheep are in the fields, which they wouldn't have been in the wintertime. And then the manger, a manger doesn't, that looks like a bassinet. A manger is a feeding trough, right? And then the one you really won't like me for is the word inn is not in the Greek. It's house. And there's no mention of a stable anywhere in the biblical story. It's beautiful church tradition, but recognizes church tradition. And yes, it is. And the angel's right there, right? Like I said, it's beautiful. We understand what it represents. But it also gives the critics an opportunity to cast doubts, especially at people that are new Christians. So I think it's really important to educate people that, yes, we're representing something with this. This is not meant to be the story. And I think too often it gets, I was shocked to find out the wise men came 2 years later. Okay, that really, or I did a word study and found out the word in is not in the Greek. That was very troubling for me. But I think if we just educated people, it becomes nothing, because it doesn't impact anything that we believe in any way. Now you guys are really not going to like the next one, but I'll just show you one. Jesus, the name above all names. Do you guys know this one? Well, Jesus isn't a Hebrew name. Jesus was born Yeshua. So the name above all names is Yeshua. Do you know somebody else in the Bible whose name was Yeshua? This one hurts. Joshua, the leader of Israel after Moses, is Joshua. The English translation of the word Yeshua is Joshua. And how we got Jesus is very complicated. I'm not going to go into it because you can spend an hour on that conversation. It was several languages and some transliterations and letters that are feminine instead of masculine in one language, and you end up with Jesus. But we all know who we're talking about when we talk about Jesus, so it's no big deal. But again, skeptics and critics use this kind of stuff against us. It's like, well, it's not that. Well, yeah, but we know who we're talking about, right? So it's no big deal. But I think we need to educate ourselves on these things, or we can be surprised, or maybe even it can cast doubts in our own minds about what the truth really is. So that's really what this is going to be about. Any questions? You guys are so quiet. And I'm way off my notes. I don't even know where I'm at. Sorry.
When you were talking about the 13, there was some stuff on Facebook about why people should not take down their Christmas decorations until the 6th of January. And people were asking why. When you go back and research it, they were saying that the wise men came to see Jesus on the 6th day. Which, if they didn't, it might have been the 6th day 2 years later.
2 years later.
They don't realize that. And then they said once the wise men came to see Jesus, then Christmas was over. That was their guideline for taking down stuff on the 6th. That's the crazy thing I heard.
Yeah. There's so many there's so many interesting things about the story, because if you believe the wise men came from Chaldea, which is most likely, probably Susa, because that's where Daniel was, that's where they would have had the scriptures, it takes them months to get to Judea from there, following the Fertile Crescent. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like we don't even know what day Jesus was born on, or what year. Everybody, it was 0. It's like, no, it's probably like 3, maybe 5, even 8 BC. We don't know, because it depends on your history and when that census took place, which is a little cloudy in history. There are a lot of contested views, and it's not important. But what's important is to not be dogmatic about it. And when people say, oh, but you guys think this, but that's not true. And it's like, well, you could be right. And go ahead.
People think that he was born during Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And the time of year is right. It would be about September. And came a tabernacle among us.
Oh, that'd be beautiful if it was true. And it could be. It's just... the thing is, these nuances are not important to our core of what we believe. So knowing that there's some ripples as to what the truth is, actually is somewhat good. And it does allow us to kind of address things that people use against us as Christians. Because there's a lot of atheists out there, and I'll talk about some like Bart Ehrman, who's an expert New Testament scholar who's an atheist. And he uses these kind of things against Christianity to prove it's not true. And he's totally misuse of the evidence, but he has an agenda, obviously. So our priority and the kind of the idea of doing this series is to really focus on what effective communication looks like. I mean, God's called us to go, reach, and teach, which means we have to be effective in our communication of what we believe. And to be effective in any form of communication takes 3 things. It takes knowledge, it takes application, and it takes character. And what I mean is, knowledge is, you got to know what you're talking about if you're going to go talk about it, obviously. Application is, you got to know how to apply that knowledge in a way that your audience can actually understand. The words I use in this forum are very different than if I went to a kindergarten class, or if I'm overseas in a country that doesn't speak English first. You have to apply that knowledge in a way that your audience can understand. And then character, obviously how you present it matters. And that's the one we all struggle with the most. But in here, for this series, we're going to concentrate on the knowledge part. And then if you guys are interested, we'll move on to the application part maybe later in the year. There's some books that have great techniques on how to apply things. And then the character, you're on your own. I'm a work in progress myself. Only God can help your character. So we'll grow on that one together. But our purpose is so we can be more effective communicators of the gospel. And how you do that is building that foundation of knowledge, not just with the Bible, but with everything else. Because the Bible's perfect for telling us how we're supposed to live. But for people that don't believe in the Bible, we can't use the Bible. So can we show them that God is real without using the Bible? And that's what I'm going to try to show you the most during this series. We'll talk very little about the Bible other than when we're talking about the reliability of the Bible. But what I want to show you is there's so much evidence. I mean, the world is just amazing. Science is amazing. And just to give you a taste, this is what the sessions are going to look like. Next week, we're going to talk about worldview. And if you don't know what worldview is it's kind of the principles that you live by. It's what dictates your behavior in the world. And if you're not really clear what your worldview is, as far as how you would answer what they call the existential questions, then you're going to be swayed by what you hear on the TV or what you read in a newspaper. And as Christians, we want to make sure our worldview is rooted in what God said, but out there they don't have that. And there are some very unusual worldviews. And so what we'll do is we'll go through 6 of the predominant worldviews, which encompass most of the world's religions, and see how they answer those existential questions, and then show how they can't live out what they say they believe. And getting a little bit of that background is the reason it's important, and as kind of the foundational step with talking to people, is when I use a word, and when you hear it, you might not hear what I mean, even though it's the same word, because words have lots of different meanings. And when you start talking about cross-cultural, or definitely cross-religion, sometimes we use exactly the same terms, religion to religion, and they mean completely different things. And so we have to kind of understand who we're talking to if we're going to be effective communicators. And one way is being able to ask the right questions so you understand what their perspective is. Because if you don't know their perspective, you can be, espousing about the good news and they think you're talking about Allah or something. So it's important for us to kind of get a basis on worldview. And that's one thing I learned in seminary I had no idea about was worldview. And it's amazingly helpful to spend a little time on that. So we'll spend next week on that. We'll go through a whole bunch of scenarios. I hope it'll be fun. Next, people don't believe in truth anymore. They'll talk about your truth, my truth. Truth is relative. That's a bunch of hooky, right? I mean, it's not true. And there are some really logical ways to walk through to show that there can only be one truth, okay? And I think having examples in your mind where they're fresh and ready when someone presents you with something like this is really useful. So we'll walk through some of those things just so if you were meeting an atheist and they're going to sit down and talk to you and they're open to having a conversation, this is kind of the roadmap of how you would work them forward. If someone's more advanced in their understanding, then you'd start at a different place. So is there a God? Believe it or not, there's Christians that are sitting in our pews that aren't sure if there's a God. And there's some great arguments for why there is a God. None of those evidences will point you to the God of Christianity for sure, but I like what they call the cumulative approach to things. And it's this idea that, where's my little stone? You have arguments, and you think of a teeter-totter, and each argument goes on one side of the teeter-totter until everything points in one direction. And the evidence for God is kind of like that. There's no one evidence that everybody is going to look at and say, oh, that's it. Everybody's going to have a different one that kind of speaks to them. That's the reason to learn all of them. But as you put each one in somebody's shoe, it becomes to the point where, well, there's really only one explanation or one option. And there's only one truly livable worldview, and that's the Christian worldview, which we'll talk about next time. And then we'll talk about, can you trust the Bible? And there are a lot of Christians that struggle with this. Is the Bible reliable? We'll talk about reliability of the Bible and why it's reliable, inerrancy, Bible translations, and original language stuff, which should be kind of fun. We'll have a couple of exercises with that, especially since we have multiple languages represented in the room. That will make it a lot more fun. But we'll spend a couple weeks going through that, and if you have any doubt if the Bible's reliable, you won't, because the evidence is so overwhelming. It's kind of amazing. But it's good to have it on your mind, so when somebody throws out, oh, what about those Old Testament problems when they killed all those people? Well, there's really good evidence for why that happened. And then we'll get to the one that is the atheist's best argument, the problem of evil. And they'll use this one. But I promise you, when we get done, there won't be any problem with evil anymore. It's our problem with bad, but not evil. And I'll explain why. I really appreciate some of the perspectives that I learned because I'd never thought of it that way. And once you hear it, it's like, oh yeah, this is actually an argument for God, not against God. And then we'll talk about the historical Jesus. And I don't know how many of you know the historical documentation for Jesus, but it is amazing. There's more historical documentation for the life of Jesus than any other historical figure from the 4th century earlier, overwhelmingly. And this is not just in the Bible, this is outside of the Bible. And then it's amazing how many people want to deny the resurrection. And there's some really kooky theories on this. But if you haven't been exposed to the theory before, when someone first tells it to you, you're like, well, it knocks you off. So what I want to do is kind of expose you to some of those theories and why they're stupid, and how you can rebuttal those arguments in a way that might be that stone in the shoe for that person that holds that view. And then we'll get to the one I like, which is the science in the Bible. And I hope you guys like it as much as I do, because the Bible is not a science book, but there's so much science in the Bible. In fact, as we discover more and more in science, the Bible more and more. We'll talk about archaeology, and then we'll take on naturalism, which is the common one, and it should be fun. And then we'll see what we're going to do with the last session, because basically what your questions and comments are, and then we'll see what we're going to do from there. Okay? All right, so the idea is this is going to fit together like a puzzle. Think of this as your worldview, and your opinion on each one of these things and your knowledge each one kind of builds that worldview so you can stand up to whatever the world is thrown at you. Is it? Okay. So that's kind of the intent of the sessions. And you're not going to hear me all the time, I promise. We're going to listen to some other much smarter people than me as we go through. One of them is John Lennox. And if you don't know does anybody know who John Lennox is other than my family? Well, you got to get to know this guy. John Lennox is... Did you? No one respond? John is he's the most credentialed, probably the most credentialed Christian ever, okay? I got to get his degrees right, so let me find myself on my notes here. He has a master's degree and a PhD in bioethics from Oxford, a doctorate degree in science and mathematics from Surrey, a master's and a PhD from Cambridge, and a whole bunch of other degrees. He's the most well-read person. When you listen to him talk, you're like, wow, this guy he's the real deal. And he has debated most of the atheists out there. And if you like that kind of thing, just get on YouTube and search John Lennox and whatever atheists you know of, Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or whoever, and listen to his debates. It's very entertaining. So I'll have a few little clips from John Lennox. Another guy you've already heard from is C.S. Lewis. You guys know C.S. Lewis. Another reason to like John Lennox, he was once a student of C.S. Lewis when he was at Oxford. So if you needed another reason to love John Lennox, C.S. Lewis is probably it. But C.S. Lewis, the way he writes puts things that are really complex into really simple terms, and it sticks in your head the way he writes things. So we'll hear from C.S. Lewis, as you already have. Lee Strobel, I'm sure most people know The Case for Christ, so we'll hear from him. J. Warner Wallace, anybody know this guy? If you like detective stories, this is your guy. He was a cold case detective in Los Angeles. He's been featured on Dateline. He was in the movie God Not Dead. And he uses his detective techniques to prove the resurrection, to prove the authenticity of the Bible. And if you like that kind of thing, he's your guy. I love listening to Warner Wallace. Another is James Tour. Anybody know James Tour? He's from right here in town. He's a professor here at Rice University. He's taken on the origin of life researchers in recent years and basically called them out as fraudulent. Is the fact that they always claim that they've created life in the laboratory. It's so not true. The origin of life people, which is a multi-billion-dollar year activity. He's just been named the head of the National Science Foundation, which is an amazing thing. So he is. If you have questions about the origin of life type thing, he's the guy you want to go to. He's a chemist, so sometimes it's a little technical. I love it because I'm a chemist, but if you want something that's a little more less technical, Stephen Meyer is a really good one. The Discovery Institute. his expertise is the idea of intelligent design and countering the evolutionary perspective. Another is Tim Keller. Tim Keller was a Presbyterian pastor up in like Boston. He died recently of cancer, but he is a New York. His way of presenting ideas is really disarming. He believed you should always know all the criticisms against your perspectives and all the alternative views, and you should present those when you're teaching so that you're not indoctrinating somebody in something. And what he means is, well, if I teach you something and I didn't share that there's an alternative, and then you go out there in the world and you learn the alternative, now all of a sudden it looks like I was holding something back from you, and it can cause doubts. And his techniques are really good. I'll be using some of those techniques just because I really like them. Gary Habermas. If you want to know something about the resurrection of Christ, this is your guy. He's probably the expert on all the evidences and the arguments against the alternative theories. He also has done a lot of research on near-death experiences, so if that's something you're interested in, he's your guy. Now, I'll share this with you. Norman Geisler is another one. I think Geisler wrote like 100 books, maybe 90 books. He's the one I would go to if someone's challenging you about the inerrancy of the Bible. He has a way of explaining what that really means. It doesn't mean word for word accurate in our English Bibles. What it means is thought, and he is kind of the guy to look up. And like I say, he's written lots of books. William Lane Craig is probably the most prolific debater of the Christian apologists. He's written like 120 books, and he's the guy that if you don't want to hear the technical explanation, you want something that is more not scientist, he's your guy. He can explain the case for the resurrection, the case for truth, the case for God in ways that are really simple and straightforward, and you can share his talking points with anybody. And then Frank Turek, who's one of my personal favorites. He's a retired Air Force guy, and again, he's very funny. If you've never listened to him, he's worth listening to, and he can make something that seems really technical, really lighthearted, and he's really technically sound. He actually studied under Norman Geisler. Greg Kokel, who we'll talk about a little bit, his key is he has this technique about asking questions and letting somebody unravel their own perspectives. And it's non-threatening, it's non-aggressive, but it's a great technique. And actually, if you guys are interested, when we're done with this course, we might do a couple weeks on one of his books, because his tactics book is just amazing. And then Michael Laconin is a Christian historian, probably the best of our time. Daniel Wallace is ancient manuscripts, especially in the New Testament. He's just the guy. He's up here at Dallas. And then you'll hear from a couple of my seminary professors, Jonathan Pritchett and Braxton Hunter, throughout the series. So these are just some of the guys that we're going to be dealing with. So you know you're not just going to hear from me. So but if you have a specific topic that you're interested in, let me know, and then maybe I can point you toward one of these guys, because they each have an expertise and a strength in how they present. So, apologetics, it's a terrible word. Let me just let John Lennox explain what apologetics is.
Sometimes I think people feel a bit put off by the word apologetics. They think that's for kind of very professional experts, or they think it maybe sounds like apologizing. But what is apologetics?
Well, it's not apologetics. The word is a disaster, because it's a transliteration. Straight from Greek apologia becomes in English apologetics. But if they translated the word, it means defense. And Peter puts it brilliantly, the apostle. He said, always be ready to give a defense, an apologia, to anyone who asks you a reason for the hope that's within you. Now, I find that fascinating. I've actually written a little book about it called Have No Fear.
So it's just a taste. You guys want to take a break? So any questions, comments, thoughts before we get started?
I can see already that if you're going to give all the knowledge stuff, we're going to need the application stuff, right? I can see this already.
Well, we'll give you a couple. We'll give you some tastes of the application yet, just so you can give you a nugget. But yeah, you got to get the knowledge first. One thing about Kokel's book, I like it. It's called Tactics, but it's all application. It's like if people don't have the foundation, it's like you can use the application, but then when people rebuttal you, you're stuck, right? Alrighty, so we'll get started again. So what is apologetics? You kind of heard it from John Lennox. It's, in his words, it's a catastrophe word. It means a reasoned argument or a justification. That's what the word means. And why we have apologetics is just kind of foolishness. It comes from the Greek word apologia, but instead of translating the word, they transliterate it. Transliterated means they take the word and they kind of change its spelling a little bit and just bring it into English. But the problem is we had a perfectly good word for apologia in English called defense. And we did this a lot in the Christian realms, unfortunately. And so we're stuck with this word that sounds like apology, but it doesn't mean apology. It means a reasoned defense. It means basically supporting what you believe. It's really a legal term. It would have been used in the courtrooms of the day in the Greek and Roman Empire. So we're kind of stuck with apologetics, and I'm going to use that term because you need to know the term, okay? If you're going to, but you need to know what it means. So when people throw, what's this apology? And it's like, well, it's not apology. It's a foolish word that got transliterated into English, and this is what it means. This is what we mean when we say it. We're not saying we're apologizing for anything because we have nothing to apologize for because our Lord made everything. He probably knows better than anybody else. So, yeah. And another thing, a lot of people will say apologetics is a Christian term, and it's not. There's actually apologists for Muslim, for Hindu, for Judaism, for you name it. It just means defending your faith, and atheists don't like to hear this, but a lot of the guys that I mentioned would turn around and tell them that they're atheist apologists because they're defending what they believe. Even though they say they don't believe anything, they really believe something because you have to believe something. So apologist is just a word, right? The purpose of Christian apologetics is to learn how to defend what we believe, our faith. And that means, well, first, questions. It means figuring out answers to your questions and your doubts and the questions and doubts of others. It means developing answers to not only your questions and doubts, the questions and doubts of the people that sit next to you in the pew at church, but the people you might meet out in the community, or maybe that family member or whatever it is, getting an answer so that you can convey it. That's the knowledge part. And then the argument part is not fighting. We're not talking about fighting when we talk about arguments. We're talking about a reasonable and logical, loving and graceful argument, which means talking points effectively, how you're going to convey that knowledge that you've gotten. And I really think the core of this is we need to ask questions when we have them, and then we need to look hard to get the knowledge and talk to other people. If you have the question, chances are somebody else has the question. And so I'm blessed. In our house, we talk about this around the dinner table every night. Sonny and Walter know they lived with us for a while. So we have a question. We just blurt it out, and then we go figure it out as best we can. And I think I would love it if our churches would develop that kind of an environment, because it prepares us for not only strengthening our faith and giving us more confidence and encouragement, but then we're ready when people have questions out there because we've already kind of gone down the process. Even if you don't know the answer to whatever that person's doubt is, when you've repetitively gone through the process of questioning and then looking for an answer, then you're ready to help them whatever path that might take. So reasonable, logical, loving, and with grace conversation is what we mean by argument. So why apologetics? And these are things that I guess I was not completely aware of, or had never really formulated it. But in our culture, especially in the United States, the demands and expectations on religious people or Christian people is a little different than it was when I grew up. A lot of people in our churches, when they have doubts, they just reject their belief, and that's the reason so many people are leaving the faith. Part of it's our fault because we have not fostered this environment where they can ask questions. So when they have doubts, instead of this perception that they feel like they look stupid, they just leave, and it's so sad when the information's available. So, I mean, the encouragement that I have is I want to be in that position where I can encourage them to ask the questions. Being an old teacher, there's no stupid questions, right? The only stupid question is the one that's not asked, and we have to foster that environment somehow.
And then us people sitting need to not have so much pride to ask the question. I don't know. It's okay.
It is.
But people don't do it.
No, I think part of it's a fear thing. I mean, I've been in that situation, but it's like, I think recognizing that I don't know, the person next to me doesn't know, the pastor doesn't know. I mean, we're in it together. So why not ask the question, and maybe somebody has an idea, and then we can build from there. And that's the reason for apologetics as the term, or as the discipline, is this idea of not only discovering the question, but then looking for a solution, and then taking it that next step further of actually coming up with a way to convey that solution in a way that people will understand, and then sharing it. You know, when you have something that pops up in your Bible studies that just kind of bothers you, and you go and dig and you find, share it with somebody. And that's really the core, to me, of what apologetics is about. This idea of defending our faith is growing together as a community of Christ. And if you had the question, chances are somebody else had the question, so share it, which is kind of what we're doing. So we don't want people to walk away from the faith just because they were scared to ask the question, or maybe, I've heard so many of these stories where one of the authors, I don't have her book out here, Nancy Percy, talks about when she was in high school, she had questions about her faith, and the people in the church just said, well, you'll grow out of it. Didn't even try to address the questions. And she walked away from her faith because of it. If you don't know her, I'll talk about her book probably next time. She wrote a book with Colson. You know Colson? This lady is amazing author. But we'll talk about that another time. But it's like if people aren't cultivating the opportunity for people to ask those questions, that's what happens. Or maybe even worse, they just kind of downplay the question completely. And probably that's because the person that was asked didn't have the answer. And so they're trying not to look stupid either. And it just kind of, it's a spiraling death spiral is what it is. But the problem we have in society is if we don't give answers to people, they're still going to get answers, but they're going to get it out there. And the world is going to give them an answer, and it's going to be a lie. It's going to be deceiving. So if we as a church don't give answers, we're just turning them over to craziness. And we have to get engaged to help our fellow believer stay focused on what's most important, because there's a lot of people leaving the faith, especially in America. So another why apologetics. I touched on it before. Truth is it's under attack in our society. The basis for truth is under attack in our society, and And what research will show you is that most beliefs in the American culture are more emotional than they are rational. And we have to stay rational when we are sharing what truth is, no matter how irrational the people we're dealing with are, because logic and reason always is going to win in the end. But we have to recognize that the people we may talk to aren't reasonable. And we shouldn't be too worried about that, because our job is to just stick with the truth. Truth is always truth. It's not subjective. It's objective. And in fact, truth is a person. The truth is Jesus. Jesus said he was the truth. And when people say truth is relative, and this is the common thing, I always just go back to math. It's 2 plus 2. What is 2 plus 2, Ayla? 4? It's not 5? Is 2 plus 2 ever 5? Zoe? You're looking at me with that look. Can 2 plus 2 ever be 20? Can it be yellow? Can it be green? No, 2 plus 2 is always 4, right? There's really absolute truths, and anybody that is willing to be reasonable knows that there's absolute truths. If you walk out on a balcony and you step off, you're going to hit the ground, right? You can believe gravity doesn't exist, but the truth is it exists, and you're going to go smack. So anybody that says truth is relative is just denying reality. And we don't have to get into that. I know I think the one that bothers me the most, this one we hear a lot, is Jesus. When they're talking about Jesus, say, oh, Jesus was a good teacher, or he was a moral teacher, or he was a good example. No. And I say that because Jesus claimed to be God, and there's no middle ground on it. You can't be good and be a liar. Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or he's Lord. I promise you he's Lord, but you can't let it slip. When someone tells you, oh, Jesus was a good teacher, you got to stand for truth and not let it slide, because it's too easy to let those little things slide to the point where you don't have anything. I mean, truth is truth, and we got to always stand for truth. It means we can disagree with people, but we got to disagree by giving them the truth. And when we talk about truth in one of the next sessions, one of my seminary professors, he's the head of Trinity Seminary, Braxton Hunter, it really drummed into me the fact that we should never cede territory as Christians. Beauty is real, goodness is real, and there is truth, right? And we have to stand for those things. And that's part of learning what those arguments are that they're going to throw at you, so that you're ready you're not caught off guard. Another thing, and the reason we need apologetics or to learn about defense is, in America especially, skeptics have changed. The nature of skeptics has changed. They've become very hostile toward Christian traditional values. In fact, if you try to defend traditional values, you might be called a bigot. You might be called dangerous or even violent. And well, let me find my examples, and I will read a couple of these to you. So, a Christian lady in England, just this past year, I believe, was arrested for praying silently across the street from an abortion clinic. You guys hear that story? You remember what she was accused of? She was accused of violence against the people in the abortion clinic on a public street from across the street. Now, the reason for that is she was in what they called a safe zone. The question is, what were they trying to keep you safe from? Silent prayer. And obviously she was honest. They couldn't know what was in her mind. The police officer asked her what she was doing, and she was honest, because we have to be honest when we're Christians, and she was arrested. Now, she was eventually released and her charges were dropped, but in England, the government thinks silent prayer is an equivalent to violence. And it may seem a little shocking to you until you start reading some of the other headlines that are out there. Did you know that during COVID, there was a Canadian pastor, he's actually from Poland, but he lives in Canada, was arrested for instigating violence because he had a prayer with the truckers during their protest, and his prayer was for peace. And he was arrested for instigating violence for a prayer of peace in the public square on TV. Yeah, so that's Canada. So silent prayer or public prayer is the equivalent of violence in Canada right now. You think it's new. It's like this has happened in Australia. It's happened in America. And another one I had here is in 2010, 2 Christians were arrested for street evangelism and singing hymns in Hampton, New York, or New Hampshire, sorry. And if you think it's new, there were 500 arrested in Greenville, South Carolina for silent prayer outside an abortion clinic in 1993. So it's not a new thing. And they were charged with intimidation and, what is it? It was like aggravated assault. This is 1993. This is 30 years ago. And then just a couple of months ago, in August, a young guy was arrested in Watertown, Wisconsin for sidewalk preaching at a Pride event. And I don't remember exactly what his charges were, but he was fined like a couple $1,000s and put in prison for 30 days or something like that. It was some stupid thing. But this is happening all around us. Yet a pro-abortionist can firebomb a pro-life, and they don't even investigate the crime. Or the alphabet soup people can go to Congress and disrupt Congress, or come to one of our church services, and the police aren't going to do anything about that. So we need to recognize that the nature of skeptics has changed. We're viewed as the violent ones, even when we're doing silent prayer. And that's a reason to have a reasoned argument for your faith. It doesn't mean you're going to be protected for problems, because, well, Jesus actually promised us this. It's not new, and a lot of people say, oh, the world's coming to an end. It's a mess. It's getting worse. Read Fox's Book of Martyrs if you think it's worse now than it was before. It's always been this way. Every generation, every century has faced trouble. We've been kind of shielded from it in America for most of my life, but the rest of the world didn't have that luxury. And so we shouldn't be surprised it's coming, but we need to be prepared for it. So what we're talking about is not engaging people like this. And if you don't know who these people are, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Lawrence Krauss are kind of part of a group called the New Atheists. Richard Dawkins is a biologist from Oxford. Sam Harris is a neurophysiologist or physicist from Stanford, and Lawrence Krauss is a physicist from Arizona State. These are outspoken, aggressive atheists. We're also not going to give you any information that will help you address celebrities like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie or Johnny Depp, or athletes like Aaron Rodgers. I know he's in the wrong uniform, sorry. But they're outspoken atheists. They're aggressive. If you listen to them talk, they want to eliminate Christianity from the face of the earth. That's their objectives. So we're not preparing you to talk to people like that. Okay? I mean, I'm not saying they don't need us, but chances are you're not going to have the opportunity anyway. So we don't think that that's the group. And we're not preparing to deal with the obstinate people out there, the ones that are just looking for an argument. These pictures don't mean anything other than they were kind of representative of the people that are looking for a fight. There's really no reason to engage them. The Bible says don't throw the pearls to the swine. The reason is the pig is just as likely to come and trample you and hurt you. It doesn't care about your argument. People that don't care about your argument aren't worth engaging. The reason you engage these people or the celebrities is if somebody else is listening. Okay, it doesn't mean you should give up on somebody if it's in your family, obviously, but just fighting for the purpose of fighting is not what this is about. And apologetics is not intended to be that. That we're not in the argument business. We're in the reasonable discussion business. What we're really focused on is reaching the people that God puts into our lives. And these are the people that we meet at the store, we sit next to in church. I don't remember which, I think it's Casual Christianity, or what was that book? I can't remember, where he said the largest evangelical opportunity in America is in the pews of our churches. And, take that for what it's worth. There are people who have doubts in our pews, and we have to be prepared to help them. They're at least in the pews. But I think to assume that everybody has a strong walk with God because they come to church on Sunday is just not true. And so those are the people that I want to encourage you guys to help with, because they need it. And on your job, I mean, you're going to have opportunities to live as Christ. When people ask you the question, you can put that stone in their shoe, and then if they come back, then you have the open door to share. You don't always have to beat them over the head with the Bible. The idea is put the stone in their shoe and have them come back to you, and then you have a right to be heard. So that's the purpose of apologetics. So why we need apologetics? I'm going to just give you some statistics that will make you sad. Barna research, this is about 10 years old. 70 to 75% of youth leave their faith after high school. Christians in our churches, we're not teaching, especially youth, to counter the arguments they're going to hear out there. We don't learn to cross-examine the skeptics. And the atheists are very aggressive. Majority of college professors view Christians very unfavorably. In fact, they'll... Why is because most of them are atheists, and most of them are very aggressive atheists. The per capita atheist, or I'd say staunch atheist, is about 5 times more likely in the university setting than it is the general public. And the new atheism that came out in the early 2000s, it was very aggressive. And their purpose was to eliminate religion, not just Christianity, eliminate religion. They call it things like a disease on society. And so they're very aggressive in the manner at which they want to get rid of Christianity. I mean, to say it's not a religion is kind of a joke. But they're rabidly anti-Christian. I mean, not just slightly. It's not agree to disagree. It's if you disagree with me, I'm going to eliminate you. And that's kind of the attitude you hear. If you disagree with anybody out there in the public square right now, especially if any of the hot button topics, the alphabet people or the gender people or whatever those topics are, if you disagree with them, they come back at you like they want to kill you.
What do you mean by alphabet?
The LBGT, lesbian, gay. I don't know what they all are because I don't keep up on it. I refer to them as alphabet because they always have that alphabet list of acronyms. I don't even know what they are. But if you counter their beliefs, they come back at you very well. They accuse you of violence, right? That you're dangerous to society because you disagree with them, and we got to be prepared for that, and especially our youth. Like Dana back there going to college, if you profess to be a Christian, there are a lot of people that are going to think you're stupid, and that's we're not. There's a lot of evidence for what we believe, but we have to recognize we're going to face people that aggressively want to not only change our mind, they want to shame us into changing our mind.
The problem is we're not taught how to defend our faith.
Which is the reason we're here. And it's the reason you're here, right? So that's kind of the reason we're here. That's what apologetics is about, and that's the reason we're kind of trying to... But we have to recognize we're going to be called names. We are. It's okay. The people calling you that name doesn't make them bad. It just makes them... It is. I mean, Jesus promised us, right? Even Christian is a name. Amen. Yeah, I actually like Peter. Christian was a little Christ is what Christian means, and it was really meant to be an insult. And Peter's like, no, we are little Christs. We should embrace this insult because it's true. And it's like we should not be scared of what a name is. We just be confident in what we believe. But our young people and many of us don't want to be called names, so we try to be quiet when we're in those environments. And I think God's calling us to not be aggressive, but to not be silent. It's on them if they're going to be nasty to us, but we don't have to be that way. We don't act that way. We act our way. We emulate our leader, or we try to. That's the character part that I told you it's a work in progress. But I think we have to get prepared, and we have to, like Judy said, we have to get the background so that we're ready for it when it comes, because Annie's right. We are going to face it. You can't avoid it. You can try, but you will not avoid it. You'll have an opportunity in your everyday life, whether it's at the store or if you're working in the work or at school, where someone's going to confront you, and that you just have to be prepared on how you're going to address that. And if you haven't got the knowledge, you're not ready for the application, and then you can't help that person, because that person has a problem of some sort that has got them to that point. It probably has nothing to do with you. And that's like, I guess, Kokel's tactics book is this idea of asking the right questions and leading them to what the real question is. They're being aggressive toward you because you're a target of their emotion, but you're not the cause. So, and I got a couple books over here. These two that are on. This is Stealing from God is Frank Turek, and he talks about how atheists actually have to steal from God and the Bible to make their argument against God. It's a really fun book. We've been reading it as a family. And then I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Frank actually was a studying under Geisler when this book was written, so he's actually written a follow-up to this book. But they're great books if you want. It just kind of laying out the simple, non-technical approach on how to address the problems people are tossing at us, those insults. What's the origin of those insults, and how do we counter them? But I want to show you a video. I think the guy is Tim Barnett. He's with Stand to Reason, which is Kokel's group, and you'll like this video. This is the power of questions.
Oh, hi there. So there's a video of Canadian Conservative Party leader that's gone viral because it's, well, awesome. It features Pierre Poilievre eating an apple while being interviewed by a local journalist. The end result is a masterclass in how to respond when you're in conversation with someone who disagrees with you. Take a look.
On the topic, I mean, in terms of your sort of strategy currently, you're obviously taking the populist pathway.
What does that mean?
Well, appealing to people's more emotional levels, I would guess. I mean, certainly you tap very strong ideological language quite frequently.
Like what?
Left wing, this and that, right wing. I mean, it's that type of ideological thing.
I never really talk about left or right.
Anyways,
I don't really believe in that.
Okay, a lot of people would say that you're simply taking a page out of the Donald Trump book.
Like which people would say that?
Well, I'm sure a great many Canadians, but
like who?
I don't know who, but
well, you're the one who asked the question, so yeah. You must know somebody.
Okay, I'm sure there's some out there, but anyways, the point of this question is, I mean, why should Canadians trust you with their vote, given not just the sort of ideological inclination in terms of taking the page out of Donald Trump's book, but
what are you
also
talking about? What page? What page? Can you give me a page? Give me the page. You keep saying
in terms of turning things quite dramatically in terms of Trudeau and the left wing and all of this. I mean, you make quite a it's quite a play that you make on it. So I'm
not
just
sure.
wondering.
I don't know what your question is.
Okay, then forget that. Why should Canadians trust you with their vote?
Common sense.
All right, let's cut it off there. I want you to notice two things about this interaction. First, Pierre Poilievre uses no less than 7 simple questions to disarm this journalist. Notice how the reporter accuses Poilievre of taking the populist pathway and using a page out of Trump's playbook. In response, he neutralizes these accusations by 2 simple questions, or at least 2 kinds of questions. The first is, what do you mean by that? This is a clarification question. When someone says something and you're not sure what they mean, or someone calls you a name, or someone makes an accusation against you, it's important to clarify what they mean. In this interview, Polyev is accused of obviously taking the populist pathway. In response, he asks, "What do you mean by that?" This is a brilliant question. Before he can respond to the claim, he needs to get clarification on the claim. So he asks, "What do you mean by that?" The second question in Polyev's arsenal is, how do you come to that conclusion, or some variation of it? This is a demand for evidence. When the journalist accuses Polyev of using very strong ideological language, he asks, like what? Rather than get defensive or lose his cool, Polyev simply asks for some evidence for the claim. When he's accused of taking a page out of Donald Trump's book, he asks, "What page? Give me the page." Unfortunately, this reporter thought he could get away with slogans rather than substance, and these questions put that on full display. So the first thing I want you to notice is Polyev's masterful use of questions. Second, I want you to notice how comfortable Polyev looks during this entire exchange. Doesn't he look totally relaxed, just enjoying his apple? This isn't a coincidence. By skillfully using questions, he's able to stay out of the hot seat and in the driver's seat in this conversation. Questions keep you safe, even when you're being questioned by a journalist. So whatever your political leanings, I think we can all appreciate this masterclass in using good questions in tough conversations.
So that's a taste of the application side of things. But you have to have a pretty good, firm understanding of your background if you're going to ask those questions, because he's going to respond back. And you may not have someone that has no idea on how to deal with you at the other end. Obviously, the reporter kind of fell apart, but I think you can see that questions are really disarming, and the people that are challenging us or calling us names or whatever may not understand why they're doing it, and to ask them just for clarification can actually disarm a lot of situations, and sometimes it makes it fall away. And that is a skill that I think I need to learn. That will be the next step. This is just as a bit of a taste of what you can do with knowledge base.
If you watch the news, they all use the same talking points. They just keep repeating the same thing over and over. Same question.
But yeah, I love this video because it really does demonstrate where they're just talking points. There's no backing. There's nothing underneath it other than it's a name-calling game. But instead of falling and trying to call names back, if you just engage them in a clarification exercise, what do you mean by that? Well, they don't have any idea what they mean by it. They have no idea. They're waiting for your emotional response. So when you don't take the bait, now you can get the position where he got at the end where, okay, now he's ready to actually hear the answer. It wouldn't have mattered what Polyev would have said before that got to the end. He would have got countered with the talking points. But once you peel off all the talking points, now it's just, what's the question? This is the answer. Okay, we're done. And it's beautiful if we can just learn to do it.
Well, for example, when my son calls me a Bible thumper, I guess next time I will just say, "What do you mean by that?"
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it, and how do you know that?
The answer in this call, make it more specific. So it's very like in a school. I once have a professor. They have a very serious argument. What they do is they give each other a specific homework problem. Then they solve it. But the other one, the older one, never solve the problem. The same logic. You make it a very specific. Give one example.
Yeah.
You can talk about it.
Yeah, actually, if we go on and spend more time on the tactics, that's actually the next step, right? First, you get clarification so you know what you're talking about. Because one of the things that, if you listen to any of these guys that I was suggesting to you, one of the things they say is never try to disprove something the other person doesn't believe. So, like say a Jehovah's Witness comes to you and starts talking to you, and you want to prove that Jesus is true. You might be telling them things they don't even believe, they don't even know. Instead, listen to where they're coming from, what their exact position is before you try to counter it. And we're really eager as Christians to prove we're right, because we are right. But sometimes you can use these kind of techniques to have them kind of unravel their own situation till you get down to the one stumbling block they have, and then just address that. And I think that's the magic of what we call apologetics, is kind of learning that the way you're supposed to defend and have a reasoned argument or discussion. It's about what we have to do to address the questions that people are having and not allowing the moment when we're challenged to overwhelm us. It's the power of a question. I shouldn't even say this since this is being recorded, but I use this professionally a lot. When I'm in a situation where I either don't have time to do something or I'm a little unsure, I just ask a question and put back on somebody else's head to do the next layer. When you ask a question, it's now the burden of proof or deliveries on the other person. So when you're in a situation you feel like you're a little out of control, asking a question of the other person, it levels the playing field. So all of a sudden now they have to answer a question before you answer a question. And if you keep that playing field level, emotionally you're in a better position to address whatever's going on. And two, they're not in that where they are being belittling to you, because they'll think they have the high ground. Well, level that ground with a question, and it can change the dynamics of a conversation. And the scope of what we have to talk about isn't everything. We don't have to defend everything. I think we think we have to defend everything that people say against Christianity, and that is not true. And I want to, let me introduce you to Vodi Bakum. Does anybody know Vodi Bakum? I know my family does. He grew up here right in Houston. He was L.A. I guess he was a pastor here in Houston. In Humble. Yeah, I know some people that know him. He now lives in Africa, but he gave a quick talk at Dallas Theological Seminary, and this is just a quibbit from it. But listen how he shrinks the scope of what we have to be prepared to defend.
A couple of assumptions, and this is what really helped me. It just blessed me. When you understand apologetics by the definition that I've given you, know what you believe, why you believe it, and be able to communicate that in a winsome and effective manner to others. When you understand that, what it does is it really narrows the field. Because if my responsibility is really just to give an answer for the hope that is in me, then I don't have to know all the world religions. I just got to know the hope that is in me. Amen. I don't have to, there's a lot of stuff. So now there's limitations on what you can even ask me. I'm not responsible, for example, for defending heresies because I don't believe them.
I think that's a really important point. It's an hour-long talk, and it's really nice. But the idea is there are going to be people that are going to try to challenge Christianity with things you don't agree with. So don't defend it. I mean, we don't have to. And I like the way Bodhi kind of puts it. It's like you don't have to defend things you don't believe. There's only two facts that you really have to be prepared to defend, and that's the hope that's in you, your walk with Jesus, and the contents of the Bible. That's really it. And that makes the scope just shrinks. Our burden of proof is not everything. Our burden of truth is what we know and the basis for what we know. The key is learning so you can address the questions, and then when you're in a situation where you're going to be addressing somebody, the first step is to listen, not to talk. The second step is to listen, not to talk. You get the point? Listening has to be the first step in defending our faith, because if we don't understand what it is the person has a problem with, then we're not really prepared to defend our faith, which is the reason the questions are so important. You have to ask them enough questions to clarify what it is their problem really is before you start defending something. Or you could be defending something that they don't have any issues with. So it's important to do that, and that reduces the scope of the questions that we have to defend against. So when you're in that circumstance, I mean, obviously getting the knowledge that we're going to talk about is important, but recognizing that you don't have to defend against everything. You can shrink that scope to something that you can handle, and there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. Because I know I don't know a lot of things. I got 2 doctorate degrees, and I still know nothing, right? I know less than most of you sitting in the room. It's okay to say you don't know, okay? Because it's true. You don't know. I want to give a couple more examples, and I think you'll guys really like. This is William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland. The video's bad. It's from 1998, so I apologize, but let's just play it and then we can talk about it. You'll understand why I'm smiling.
Consider the statement, quote, "We should only believe what can be scientifically proven," end quote. Can that statement be scientifically proven? Well, obviously not. And thus the scientific naturalist's position refutes itself, and so it cannot be true.
But do you deny that science cannot account for everything?
Yes, I do deny that science
So what
can.
can't it account for?
Well, had you brought that up in the debate, I had a number of examples that I was going to give. I think there are a good number of things that cannot be scientifically proven, but that we're all rational to accept. Let me list 5. Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths, like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with an appearance of age, are rational beliefs that cannot be scientifically proven. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. You can't show by science whether the Nazi scientists in the camps did anything evil as opposed to the scientists in Western democracies. Aesthetic judgments, number 4, cannot be accessed by the scientific method because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, would be science itself. Science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumptions. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that in order to hold to the theory.
But you're missing the whole...
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So none of these beliefs can be scientifically proven, and yet they are accepted by all of us, and we're rational in doing so.
Years ago, I was speaking at an evangelistic event in Baltimore, Maryland, and I was told that there was a very vicious atheist who had his PhD from Johns Hopkins University and been an engineer for 30 years, really hated Christianity, and a person was going to bring his boss to this little evangelistic gathering where I was going to be sharing my faith. Well, I was at the hors d'oeuvre table before the event got going, and I saw this gentleman walk in the door with his boss. And sure enough, they made a beeline to the hors d'oeuvre table, and this friend of mine introduced me to this gentleman. And no sooner did we exchange pleasantries when he said, "Well, I understand that you're a philosopher and a theologian." And I said, "Well, I give it my best shot." And he said, "Yeah," he said, "I used to be interested in that myself when I was a teenager. But I've outgrown it now because I realize now that if you can't test it and quantify your data and measure it in the laboratory, it's nothing but a bunch of idle speculation and hot air." You ever heard anybody express that attitude? A lot of people have that attitude. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Well, I let him go for about another 2 minutes. And then I interrupted him and said, "Excuse me, but I have a question. I'm a little bit puzzled. If I understand you correctly, if you can't quantify something in the lab and test it scientifically, then the assertion is nothing but idle speculation, a bunch of hot air." And he said, "That's absolutely right." He said, "I've believed this for a long time." And I said, "Well, you've said 30 or 40 sentences that have come out of your mouth in the last 2 minutes. And of the 30 or 40 things you've said, I can't think of a single thing that can be tested scientifically." I said, "If I'm wrong, would you show me which statement you've made that is scientifically testable? But if I'm right, you see my dilemma? What you've been saying for the last 2 minutes is nothing but a bunch of Well, he changed the subject very quickly. But the point is that when people tell you that science is the only way we can know things, or it's the only thing that's true, that statement can't be true and it can't be known to be true. And so statements like this are false. Science, ladies and gentlemen, is a wonderful gift from God, and I'll say that before I close again. But it is only one way of knowing reality. It's important, but there are many ways to know reality outside of science. And the statement that science is the only way we can know reality is not itself something that can be known by science. And it is a self-refuting claim.
So, but that's the preparation part, right? I mean, you have to be ready to deal with these type of guys. J.P. Moreland is also part of the Discovery Institute with Stephen Meyer, one of the guys that I mentioned earlier. But I mean, what a great rebuttal, non-aggressive, and totally undercut the argument because his argument was false. And so that is, that's what we're talking about is building enough background so that we can defend our faith non-aggressively, purely truthfully, and let them unravel their own arguments. But you got to understand their arguments before you can do that. If you don't understand their arguments, you're not prepared to do what these two guys were doing. But I really liked what William Lane Craig said about science, and I think this is the one I face a lot, obviously, with evolution and naturalism. And if you think about it, science has no opinions. Only scientists do. Actually, I think this is Frank Turek says this a lot in his talks. The idea is science is just data, and you're looking for the effect or the cause of that data. Scientists make the opinions. It doesn't make it right just because a scientist says it. It doesn't matter how many PhDs they have, they're no smarter than you or I. So listening to the science is not listening to the scientist. Listening to the scientist is looking at what the data actually says. And I can tell you that there's no evolutionary data that supports evolution. They can have the opinion that it does, but there are problems. And we'll get to that another time. But science can explain things like logic and math, because if there wasn't logic and math, there couldn't be science. It can't explain anything metaphysical. Metaphysical is like our mind, our awareness. I mean, the fact that we can have a concept of time. These are all metaphysical concepts. They're not things that can be measured. We have to take it into account and take it for granted to do science. And so when people say there's nothing but the physical, the very fact they said that already took into account a metaphysical perspective. They have to have an awareness that there's nothing other than the physical. And we'll kind of talk about some of those conversations, a lot of this circular logic. And when you see them, you're like, oh, that's so easy. Now it's in your head. So when someone says it, you're ready. Aesthetics. This is one thing we don't talk about. We'll talk about when we do the truth episode. That beauty is, it's subjective from our opinion, but there's absolute beauty. I mean, God made things beautiful, and everybody recognizes that they have aesthetics. It's something that's built into us as humans. It's not scientific. You can't explain why everybody's drawn to a certain thing, but people are, and that's outside of things science can do. And then obviously ethics and morals. There's no basis in science. There's no basis for ethics and morals without God, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the evidences for God. And then obviously science can't explain science, because that would mean science is beyond itself, right? You can never explain something if you're the something. So that's kind of the introduction to how to defend your faith. And next week we will be talking about worldview and worldview. I never understood this. I didn't even know the concept, I'll be honest, until I went back to school. But this idea of being able to understand how people view and process things in the world actually explains a lot about where their gap is in their understanding, and the reason they can't get over that hump to understand Christianity is the one livable thing. And the value of learning a worldview of somebody is you can see when they start stealing from your worldview. Because people say, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. But then if someone steals their wallet, they think it's bad. And there's no basis for bad in the atheist worldview. There isn't. They have to have a standard. Without a standard, so they steal from God. That's the purpose of the Stealing from God book, where he identifies all these things that these different worldviews have to take away from the Christian God, or there's no basis for their argument at all. And when you learn that worldview, now you're kind of prepared. So when you're talking to somebody, you kind of understand where the hole is. And when they say it, then you can say, well, but your worldview doesn't agree with that. So that's not from your perspective. And being able to ask the question so you can kind of put that stone in their shoe idea, where they're living a half and half. They're taking advantage of the Christian worldview while saying they live this. And when you start pointing out the different points of their perspective that aren't based on what they say it is, it opens up the door so you might be able to have that conversation. Any questions? Comments? Nothing? I'm either really, really boring or I'm really, really boring. So I'm going to end with another song. And the atheist in that video is a guy by the name of Dr. Peter Atkins. And he's debated William Lane Craig 3 other times after this. Can you imagine? He came back for it and he got embarrassed just as badly every time. Because there's no answer. You can see on his face, there's no answer. If you watch any debates, like there's one with John Lennox and Richard Dawkins, and John, I can't remember exactly what the question is, but Richard Dawkins just looks off into space like, I got nothing. I mean, he's got nothing, because it's, it's.
The question was, do you have one example of seeing evolution? One example, one creature.
Oh, one creature. You can see the evolutionary process. But and each of these guys have something that's kind of their special, but when you ask the right pointed question, they're just like, you can just see on their face, it's like everything. It's just, I refer to as getting unzipped. They're getting exposed for what they are, because there's just nothing there. And so, okay, so, well, if I guess you don't have any questions, we'll play my last song. This song you might not have heard. You know Danny Goki? And there's a story about. Yes, he finished second. Did you know that he lost his cancer? Yes. So this song is kind of that's the background of this song. And the lyrics are up if you want to sing. It's a good singing song. Yeah, I love this song. But it kind of brings everything in perspective a little bit. I mean, we all have loved ones that we want to try to reach for Christ. And we have to kind of have peace with that. Yeah. So I hope that was good for you guys. And let me go ahead and close with a prayer, and then we can chit-chat a little bit. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time together. Thank you so much for providing so much evidence for you. You didn't have to do that. We're never worthy enough, but you love us so much. You give us everything we need so that we can see you. Help us to have peace, with whatever our loved ones' decisions are, and help us to choose the words and provide reasonable discussions to try to reach our loved ones and the people you put in our life. I love you, Lord. I trust you with everything. And I'm so thankful for each and every one of these people, my friends, that came out to talk today, because growing together is what you have asked us to do. That's what church is. That's what community is. And we all sitting here know what you've asked us to do, and that's go, make, and teach. And that's the reason we're here. And thank you, Lord, for blessing this time. And I pray this in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen.